Welcome classic rock fans to another episode of Classic Song Review, where classic tracks are excavated and explored. And for today's episode I want to talk about Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit, a song that was released in June 1967. The B-side of course was Plastic Fantastic Lover. It's certainly an iconic song. It's one that's kind of taken on a life of its own in many respects. It's been covered from everyone, from George Benson to The Damned. It's a song that very much capitalises on the interest in the Alice books in the late 60s, and it's become a kind of an anthem for that kind of burgeoning subculture in sort of late 60s America. Certainly the renewed interest in Lewis Carroll with those sort of surreal landscapes, creatures, and beautifully complemented the desire in the late 60s to explore altered states of consciousness. The Beatles at this time also confessed to loving the Alice books, and the rather childlike tone and sort of trippy meanderings certainly go some way to inspire Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Grace Slick has gone on record as saying we are the people our parents warned us about, and she's quite clear that she feels that White Rabbit is a kind of a riposte for hypocritical parents who would preach of the dangers of drug use and yet read stories that seem to be somewhat chemically inspired. For example, if I can quote Grace Slick herself, in all those children's stories you take some kind of chemical and have a great adventure. Alice in Wonderland, for example, and other examples she gives, for example, she says, in The Wizard of Oz they land on a field of opium poppies, wake up and see the Emerald City. Peter Pan, sprinkle some white dust on your head and you can fly. She would obviously feel that there were sort of specific references to certain chemicals within these narratives, and she wasn't alone. I think these narratives certainly became very popular to the kind of burgeoning sort of subculture in the 1960s. The band have gone on record as saying that they're surprised that White Rabbit got past the censors with its blatant drug references, but it's a song that predates Jefferson Airplane, of course. It was written by Grace Slick while on an acid trip. She composed the song on an upright piano listening to Miles Davis, of all people. She was actually listening to Miles Davis' Sketches of Spain. In fact, that's why the intro of the song is actually inspired by Ravel's Bolero. Grace Slick wrote this song originally for her band The Great Society. The original version is kind of meandering, really. It comes in at about 6 minutes long, and Grace Slick's vocals seem to be somewhat wandering as well to some extent. The Jefferson Airplane's version is far more direct. The chord progression in this song is also interesting. It actually starts off in F sharp minor, a chord that Grace Slick chose because it best suited her voice. But as the song progresses, you know, there's lots of minor chords used which kind of evoke a sense of darkness and uncertainty. It's quite a complex song in many respects. It kind of sort of meanders and sort of changes pace a great deal. In fact, the lyric from the song Go Ask Alice actually inspired a book in 1971 of the same title about a young girl's drug experiences. Grace Slick goes on to join the Jefferson Airplane after they see her band The Great Society play the Fillmore in 1966. The band were sort of on the lookout for a new singer, and they felt that Grace Slick's direct vocal style would be an ideal replacement for the purer folk tones of their original singer. Tolly Anderson was the original singer of Jefferson Airplane, of course. Then, of course, the band go into the studio to record what is effectively their second album, Surrealistic Pillow. The band actually played the album to Jerry Garcia, who says it sounds like a surrealistic pillow, hence that's where they get the title from. Interestingly, the band have gone on record to say that they almost left White Rabbit off the record. There were two songs that Grace Slick brought to Jefferson Airplane from The Great Society, and that was Somebody to Love and White Rabbit, two of the perhaps most iconic tunes on there. Interestingly enough, apparently the UK version of Surrealistic Pillow doesn't include the track White Rabbit. I love the way this song sort of progresses, and I particularly like the lyric when logic and proportion, because all that's questioned not only by the use of psychoactive drugs, but also in Alice in Wonderland. Logic and proportion were also questioned by writers of nonsense verse that was sort of very popular in the late Victorian period. If one is to see the song as potentially about the sort of liberation of one's consciousness and the use of psychoactive drugs, it's still quite interesting the way it has a sense of menace as each verse progresses. Even the music sort of lifts in tempo and sort of builds towards a crescendo. It's a complex song. Many have actually seen it as a kind of an anti-drug song for that reason, but I certainly don't believe that to be true. Interestingly, that sort of sense of menace made the song a perfect choice for David Fincher when he uses it beautifully in his film The Game. If we run through the lyrics of course are quite interesting, quite revealing. Of course the central conceit, the idea is that they're kind of immersed in that Alice in Wonderland world really. One pill makes you larger, one pill makes you small is a reference really to the Alice books, Alice in Wonderland, the first two chapters I think about Alice in Wonderland. The ones that mother give you don't do anything at all. It's quite an interesting line. Some have said that it's a reference to the whole sort of idea of giving people placebos. Of course, the placebo effect, there was a study done by Noel Beecher in 1955 on the sort of placebo effect, and that was still quite influential throughout the 60s. Go ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall. If you go chasing rabbits, obviously I think it's an allusion to the opening chapter of Alice in Wonderland again. And the hookah smoking caterpillar. It sort of rambles on throughout the book. I mean, there's a switch really towards the end when they talk about the White Knight talking back, because the White Knight is actually lifted from the book Through the Looking Glass. The White Knight rescues Alice from the Red Knight. Now, he doesn't actually talk backwards in this in the book, but he does, I think, fall on his head. And of course we get lines like I've already mentioned, when logic and proportion have fallen sloppy dead. Obviously it's a reference to the effects of psychoactive drugs, but it's perhaps also an allusion to Lewis Carroll writing in the sort of literary genre of sort of nonsense literature or nonsense verse. Edward Lear, of course, is quite famous for that as well. Then we get the final two lines. Remember what the Dormouse said, feed your head. Of course, the Dormouse is from the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Grace Slicker said that the term feed your head here, she said she wanted it to emphasise the importance of knowledge and acquiring knowledge, educating oneself, as well as expanding one's consciousness. Anyway, you've been listening to an episode of Classic Song Review. Please click out like, subscribe, please share this video, check out the Facebook page, but more importantly, please do keep listening.